on. What we are going to do is start off with Albie Amankona, who's going to tell us what's in the headlines politically today. So we'll be doing that in just a minute. Albie, are you there?
Hello, Trisha. Happy Sunday.
Happy Sunday, yes. So what's making the headlines, Albie?
There are a number of stories I picked out in the headlines today. I think that the overarching story is absolutely the story about Neil Parish, who, of course, is the Conservative MP who was caught watching porn on his phone in the House of Commons, not on just on one occasion, but on two occasions. And there, I guess, are two takes to this story. And one of the things that's been getting a lot of attention is a story which is in the Telegraph. And it's basically a statement that the chairman of the Conservative Party has made, Oliver Dowden, that he wants 50% of Conservative MPs to be female, which is an interesting stance to take for a Conservative politician, because historically they've always been very anti all-women shortlists and very anti-quotas, and this sounds mysteriously close to that.
When you say mysteriously close for that, you're saying what? There are other things at play here, because they realise that this whole porn thing is really affronting to women especially. So it sounds like a little bit of a sop.
Yes, I mean, this porn situation is not just an affront to women, Trisha. I was absolutely horrified to hear that a British Member of Parliament representing the people of his constituency, I believe it's Tiverton, which is down in Devon, was watching porn in the House of Commons. I mean, who watches porn at work? Most people would not be given the dignity of a resignation in that situation. If you or I were caught watching porn at work, we would be fired. And I think that this speaks to something which Lindsay Hall is saying in The Observer, which is that he wants to bring the processes in the Houses of Parliament into the 21st century. So this other story, which has particularly caught my eye this morning, is what Lindsay Hall has written in The Observer, where he's talking about reforms to the House of Commons and how staffers are employed. So at the moment, staffers are employed directly by MPs. So essentially each office, all 650 of them, are small businesses. What Lindsay Hoyle is saying is he's saying perhaps what we could have is an outside body employing MP staff. And so if they have any complaints about bad behaviour that's gone on, they can go to that outside body, and that outside body can essentially act as a HR service, which currently doesn't exist within the House of Commons.
That's a good idea as well, because you've got a lot of situations where a lot of MPs employ family members, don't they? And in the past, that has caused quite a few problems.
It has caused a few problems. I think the main claims are that it seems to be a bit of nepotism has been going on. I think historically it's been quite common for particularly male MPs to be employing their wives, for example. And that's not to say that there aren't some husband and wife teams that work extremely well. Indeed, there are, not just in the House of Parliament, but in many other businesses across the country. But it's just whether or not if in the 21st century, this is how we should be, this is how the structure of the employment should be in the House of Commons. I would probably imagine that most people would expect the House of Commons and employees of the House of Commons to have the same access to HR services as people at large corporations in the United Kingdom do.
I'd agree. And also, are you getting the best people for the job rather than just more of the same, surrounding yourself with people who never challenge or question or do anything like that? I think it's a much healthier way of going. And you've got another headline there, I understand.
Yes, I do have another headline. So this headline is a completely different story. This is about the COVID debt. So in the Times, they're reporting that the COVID debt now totals around £450 billion as of this year. So if we're thinking about how much debt we have in this country compared to our GDP, at the beginning of the pandemic in March 2020, our national debt was about £1.8 trillion, which is about 80% of our gross domestic product GDP. Now, post-pandemic, that's risen £551 billion, mostly the 450 due to COVID, but other things as well. And so that's almost 100% of our GDP, and we'll be paying £83 billion just on servicing our debt interest this year alone. So there are some really tricky times ahead for the Chancellor. He's going to be looking to balance the books as much as possible, pay down that debt. And actually, some people are saying that's why the cost of living crisis measures that we saw from the government in the spring statement are relatively small, because our national debt is so high.
It's quite horrific when the ordinary person in the street hears those figures bandied around, doesn't it? I mean, you know, it's all very well. I'm sure politicians sit there and quite used to hearing that. But I hear you say those figures, and it terrifies you as to what the future is for our children.
I would suspect that even politicians would find those figures particularly eye-watering. £551 billion is a lot of money. Debt at 100% of our gross domestic product, our economic output of every person working in the United Kingdom is the same as our national debt. Those are really high figures. And that's why it's important that the Chancellor not just focuses on supporting people through the cost of living crisis, but also focuses on getting the economy growing again. Because ultimately what's going to increase tax receipts is if we get the economy growing, then we're taking in more tax for the Exchequer, which we can then use to pay down the debt and use for our public services.
I'll be interested to get your view on the whole thing surrounding Angela Rayner. That's been rumbling on, the basic instinct crossing legs thing. First of all, there was this almost, not a witch hunt, but searching for the Conservative politician or MP who had the gall to make those comments. And then we're getting reports now that this whole story came from Angela Rayner herself, and it seems yet another incident from the bar. You know, everybody standing around drinking around the bar, and sort of the old, I was going to say the old boys club, but you know what I mean.
I completely know what you mean. I just don't know how these MPs have so much time to drink and chat to journalists. I thought they would be meaning to draft laws to make life for you and I and all of the listeners and watchers easier. But no, the story about Angela Rayner is certainly an interesting one. So I think it was about a week ago, this story the Daily Mail came out, which was, you know, lots of MPs, including the Prime Minister, said was a sexist slur against Angela Rayner, comparing her to Sharon Stone from Basic Instinct, and distracting the Prime Minister by crossing and uncrossing her legs I think it was in Prime Minister's Questions. And what has developed since then are allegations that Angela Rayner herself has essentially made similar comments, but in a joking fashion. Ultimately, I think that's quite a complex situation, and I think there's lots of layers to that story. I'm not too concerned about it, to be honest, because ultimately the other stories that have gone on this week, if we think about what's happened with Neil Parish, if we think about the fact that 56 MPs across the House are under investigation for sexual misconduct, I think in the Times there was a report that there was a male MP that was known for licking the faces of their male staffers. You know, there are just some really quite wacky things going on in Parliament, and I think that basic instinct story just lifted the lid on a culture which is crazy, and now there's a lot more going on. So I think we need to focus on the bigger issue, which is changing the culture of Parliament.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think I think one of those steps is for an outside body to start hiring staff. That would make a difference, because I think people have, obviously within Parliament, are feeling far too cosy. It's sort of like a 1950s boarding school feel. But, you know, you talked about the whole Parish thing and the pornography. Actually, I'm going to be looking later, talking with a psychotherapist about what makes people look at porn in public, because I still am trying to get my head around that.
I think what Neil Parish has said in an interview, I believe it's with the BBC, is that initially he was looking at some tractors, and then there was a website which had a very similar name to a tractor website that he goes on quite a lot, and he accidentally went onto that website and ended up being a porn website, and that was by mistake the first time, but then he actually admitted the second time he did actually go and do that on purpose.
Albie, you are definitely trying not to laugh.
Trisha, it's a funny story, isn't it? I mean, tractors to porn, I think it's quite difficult. But then I have actually also heard some farmers come out today and say that there are actually lots of words within farming for farming tools and equipment, which are quite similar for keywords that come up in porn videos, and what can be actually slurs for promiscuous people, if you will. It rhymes with O, and it's used as a farming tool, and it's also a word that comes up in porn quite a lot. So that's what some farmers are coming out and saying, but I'm not sure how much I buy about that.
And there's so many memes on social media, aren't there? Did he watch the whole thing or just the trailer? I mean, You couldn't actually make it up. But on a serious side, as you say, this is about our money, paying their wages. They're meant to be doing the will of the people, and the will of the people does not include licking people's faces and pornography. Oh, Albie, thank you so much for that. A pleasure to talk to you today.